seeing is that it's slightly harder to get folks on the phone, but not much, maybe 4 or 5%. And it's slightly easier to get them to take meetings.
Ah, interesting.
And the two effects seem to counter each other. And there's a little bit more variability day to day. Normally it's pretty flat. And the biggest variability is that Fridays have become exceptional for setting meetings, which is really interesting. So it's almost like what's going on is people are wearing themselves out Monday through Thursday, you know, having their own tons of meetings internally and everything else. And then there seems to be a little bit more setting aside of Friday for that's a little quieter for folks. And so when you call them, they're much, much more likely to have a longer conversation. Right now, if I look at here, I'm going to go over and look at our team for the day in just a second. I'll just take a peek at how we're doing. I got like 11 people, and they've had exactly 100 conversations today, and they've set exactly 20 meetings. And a 20% conversation and meeting conversion rate is really beefy. And it seems to be a Friday effect that the conversion rate's high. The dial to conversation rate is also a little high. It's 35 to 1, and normally it's in sort of the mid to high 20s, you know, 25, 26 to 1. So
your read on that is basically that people's calendars are a little bit less crowded on Friday, and therefore they're a little bit more able to receive a call and also to take the time to have a conversation.
Yeah, and I also think that the commute time that would have been, in which they would have been more or less unavailable, has become opened up. Or I think folks there's something about Fridays when you listen to these conversations, they're just more relaxed than other days.
That's interesting. So that's an important part of the dynamic of call strategy, is understanding the conversion rates and how the flow of time and people's peak energy levels even could drive engagement and conversion.
If I may chime in, I just did a call with Chorus AI, and I did a research exactly on the same topic, and I wanted to know what is the call volume per day. And they found that people's days are more stretched. People start to make calls earlier, and they have to actually make more calls in order to achieve the same outcome as before. So a lot of people work a lot harder. And they say exactly the same thing, what you said, Chris, that Fridays are more relaxed, and there is a sort of an attitude shift where people are beginning to embrace the suck of the COVID crisis, but they're chill on Fridays.
Yeah, one of the other things that I find is that this stuff is always changing a little bit at a time. And so it's easy to get yourself locked into something that you believe makes a difference. And then when you go back and look at the numbers, you kind of go, yeah, it's not that much of a difference. Like I'm looking right now at our day of the week and hour of the day analysis going back to June 1st. And Mondays, we convert at 9.5%, Tuesday at 9.4, Wednesday at 9.4, Thursday at 10.6, and Friday at 11.9, right? So that 11.9 compared to the 9.5s really is pretty big.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that I like about what Connect and Sell does is their ability to break down the science of calling.
A reach rate.
Looks like Chris might be back. Chris, we lost you for a little bit there. One of the things that's interesting is how there actually is a science to calling, and I think probably nobody's spent more time thinking about analyzing, using data to break down the calls. How would you describe the science of calls, and what are the major things that a lot of people aren't aware of when it comes to success, having conversations that matter?
You know, I think the number one thing that people aren't aware of, and it's just dead obvious when you think about it, but you have to apply it carefully, is that the action is obviously inside the conversation, but everybody focuses on the numbers that get to the conversation, right? But that's not where the action is. That's just commuting. You're just commuting to the job site.
So help break that down for us. What does that mean for everyday person? How should we think about what you just said?
Well, so I mean, the way we think about it is that the number one thing that you've got to do is have lots of conversations so you have statistical significance. You're actually looking at stuff that makes sense, you know, that you can, that you're not just kind of, you know, going with the confirmation bias that we all tend to go with on too little data. But then once you have a bunch of conversations, you realize immediately there are two factors in play that you haven't paid attention to before. One of them is voice is everything. The tone of voice is everything. And it varies rep by rep by rep, but also day by day. And the number one reason that reps' performance goes down is that their voice changes, normally because of stress at home. That's number one. So that's the biggest factor in driving the top of the funnel, is not any of the other stuff we're doing, targeting and all this great stuff. It's
even the messaging, it's a more primitive level. It's in the voice itself.
Exactly. And it comes from the fact that the information that's flowing in a conversation is flowing at about 20,000 bits a second. Whereas, you know, that's 4 emails a second, right? And so there's not very many words in there in a second of conversation. If I say, you know, our opener that we did the other day, just for fun on this, you know, I know I'm an interruption, just that part, right? How long does that take? I know I'm an interruption. That's, you know, just about 2 seconds. There's a huge amount of information, and there's 40,000 bits of emotional information hiding in the voice. Because if I said,
give us a quick hack, Chris. Like, what does a great opening soundtrack sound like if you were to mimic the ones that your science points to? Is it using humor? What's the best way to actually get yourself off on the right foot? Obviously, you guys have dedicated yourselves to the science of this, but what does those first 5 or 10 seconds of engagement sound like?
Well, Chris Voss is the guy who taught me this, and he said we have 7 seconds to get somebody to start to trust us. When I said our research says 8 seconds, he said your research is wrong at 7 seconds. I thought, okay, Chris, got it, you know. And I asked him, what do you have to do? And he says, the science says this: you have to get the other person to see that you see the world through their eyes right at the beginning, and then you have to show them that you're competent to solve a problem they have right now. And so there's only one reliable problem that they have right now, and that's you. You are the problem. So the science says, take advantage of something consistent as an input, which is you are the problem. And in fact, he pointed out the other person is afraid of you. Their emotional state they start with is fear, because
they're not happy you got them on the line, basically.
Yeah, and they're trying to escape. And so what do? Well, you say, I know I'm an interruption. So here's how it goes. Hey, Chris here from Connect and Sell. I know I'm an interruption. Can I have 27 seconds, tell you why I called? So when I say I know I'm an interruption, that's tactical empathy. I'm basically saying I see the world your way, and I'm doing it before you have a chance to say it. So I indict myself first, and you are now slightly disarmed, and now I'm going to put a plan together that shows I'm competent to solve a problem that you have right now. The problem is me. I'm the problem. So I'm going to show you that I can solve that problem. But I do it in a playful, curious voice. So my voice goes up twice. Can I have 27 seconds, tell you why I called? And the reason I'm doing that is that voice says, come along with me. So the science of you know, the voice science there says, I'm going to be very straightforward and direct in indicting myself. Like we all agree I'm an interruption, right? And if you want to blow it, you do this. I realize I'm interrupting your day. Do you have 27 seconds so I can tell you why I called? That one doesn't work at all.
And isn't it funny that you have to actually be able to get that level of granularity to get this thing to work? I think that, to my mind, I mean, that's where it's just so interesting, because for most people, they'd say, well, what's the difference between those two? But it's, I guess the answer is everything.
Everything. It's a 180. It's so similar to, like I was watching what is it? Anthony Bourdain, back when he was alive, did Parts Unknown, right? And one of his shows, he was visiting Masa, the famous sushi chef's hometown. And Masa, who's in his 60s maybe, goes to his old junior high and participates in a kendo match, you know, with the bamboo swords with the top junior high kid and defeats him. Now, how can a 60-something-year-old guy with the reflexes that he has win that kendo match against the top kid? And the answer is, it's right in there in the details of some stuff we can't see. right? The kendo master can see it, but we can't see it. It's exactly the same. The level of precision, of emotional precision that's required to win the first 7 seconds of a conversation, which is all we have, right, is extremely high. It's also very teachable and very coachable, but reps drift like crazy. I was listening to some of our reps this morning, and one of them had switched to, do you have 27 seconds? So I can tell you why I called, and he's getting this huge level of busy call back. And that, by the way, busy call back is the indication that your rep's voice is not good. So you stack rank your reps on busy call back, and you'll immediately see who's having trouble that day keeping people on the phone.
I see two elements. One is the words, and you got to line them up in the right order. And the second one is the tone of voice, because when you said, I know I'm an interruption, you can pronounce this with a tonality that's very flat, or I know I'm an interruption. So if you vary the tone of voice, and I'm getting some comments from the audience, somebody says, so true, the voice is everything. So the tone of voice, Dr. Albert Moravian at UCLA said that feelings and attitudes are communicated 38% with tone of voice, 55% non-verbally, and only 7% with words. So I think we need to focus in the training more on the tonality, on the tone of voice. And I got a quick question. I love Connect and Sell. Somebody says, how do we prevent burn rate on our call list in Connect and Sell? I find that Monday are my successful days in Connect and Sell.
So the only thing you're burning is the conversations. You're not burning the dials, because the dials didn't happen. I mean, effectively, a dial is a breeze that blew through the forest and didn't even knock a leaf down. Nothing happened. So it's only the conversations, and the only conversations that result in needing to replenish a list are those that indicate that person comes off all lists for all time, right? So that's two outcomes. One is you set a meeting with them. Okay, they come off all lists for all time until they fail to show at the meeting. Then they go on your reschedule list, by the way. Our reschedule list, when I measure it, still are making about $250,000 an hour when they're being used. Too bad they're not bigger, right? I love no-shows. I should get like a plumper sticker, except I don't drive anymore very often. That just says, I heart no-shows. This is an aside, by the way. Everybody who's listening, no-shows are the best thing that happens in sales. They're the single best thing that happens. You should be delighted whenever you get a no-show, because it gives you moral authority.
David, let's talk about the emotional component in sales. There's a lot of stress out there. What do you do to burn off the stress and stay in the peak fighting condition?
Well, I think part of it is being able to unplug from work and be conscious of your energy flow. I mean, for me personally, it's about knowing what are my peak energy periods in the day, and making sure that I use those periods to their best use, basically, and being conscious of energy flow. And then I think also just being realistic about when will you have the energy to do things, and when will you run out of energy. And if you can actually just, really be conscious of that and mindful of that, I think that plays a big part of it. Obviously, there's a lot of things like, can you unplug from work? Can you find things outside of work to recharge your batteries, things like that. But I'd say for me, the biggest thing that I've gained over time is just awareness of peak energy and mindful use of peak energy.
What is your workout routine?
Well, for me, I mean, my peak energy is usually, I would say, from about 8 in the morning through about 11 o'clock in the morning. So that's when I do my best creative work. That's when I won't allocate that time typically to meetings that are mundane or that can be accomplished with low energy. So basically those hours are usually blocked off on my calendar unless I can, unless it's for, a significant opportunity, revenue opportunity. But just being, I think, for me, I like to do a workout around 11:30 before lunch, and then I come back from doing a workout, and then I can spend the afternoon on things that don't require peak energy. And then I usually get, I think most people, the science show, get a second burst of peak energy for me that might come around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so maybe be a little mindful of, do you have a second wave of energy that you can be conscious of? And don't be afraid to use your low energy periods for things that don't require peak energy.
That's good advice. Chris, what about you?
Well, I'll show you a picture and get it right in the middle of the screen.
Right.
So see that? Yes, that's yesterday.
18,056. Yeah, that's good.
18,050 steps, and all of that, none of that was exercise. All of it was holding meetings, mostly with customers or partners. I think we've gotten a little bit wedded to the video on the computer sort of Zoom thing. And I've taken up doing the video calls mostly while walking. And it's just a huge difference in how I feel throughout the day. Just huge. Yesterday was so delightful. And that wasn't like I went for a run or anything. In fact, it was a low exercise day, except that I burned 3,900 calories and had 18,000 steps.
Yeah, I would concur with that. I use that. That's a great productivity hack. If you're doing an internal call where you don't need to be on screen. I think the one thing that people maybe aren't paying attention to is the Zoom fatigue factor. And you know, there is new science coming out that just shows how burned out people are by reacting unnaturally to the stimuli that we're used to actually reading real people's faces, and we're trying to do this thing on Zoom. And I think that fatigue factor is really important. So if you can find calls that preserve some of your Zoom capacity, if you will, that's probably a great idea. And I've found that picking out a couple meetings each day where maybe I don't need to be in front of the screen, and maybe I can be on a walk or even just out in nature is a good hack.
How about you, Gerhard? What do you, we haven't asked you.
Well, I was just looking at my steps and I only had 12,419. So,
Yes,
but I go for a daily walk, a brisk walk in a park that's nearby where there's nobody, and it has that's a park that has sort of a path. It's very rough, a lot of roots and gravel, and then uphill and downhill and grass. So it and I try to also shut off my mind by focusing on smells and sounds, and see a deer or a frog or a pileated woodpecker with a red head. It is really magnificent to step out of that screen routine that we are also used to. And when you're in nature, it's so much more dynamic, and there's something that wakes up inside you, and I get the best ideas. I walk, after an hour, I come back, and I have a huge amount of energy and ready to take on the world.
So do we have any questions, Gerhard? It looks like we might have gotten a couple in.
Yeah.
That's a tactical question, which is, when's a good time to call California?
Yes.
It kind of follows the same pattern as everyone else. It's really easy to talk to some people between 7 and 9 in the morning. So some folks are up, their energy is up, and if you can match their energy, if they're morning people, morning people are really rocking, at 7, 8, 9 in the morning. And often they're just more open-minded. It's not really about reaching them. It's more about emotionally syncing up with them and making it fun. And then, there's folks who are, again, matching peak energy. There are folks toward the end of the day that has some time and they have some energy in order to be open to you. But I like what David said, which is, if you can, the constraint on your system is going to be you, and you really have to bring a lot to a call. You really do. It is not a contest with somebody. It's an instant collaboration where you're going to be emotionally exposed sufficiently to allow them to be emotionally coming toward you, coming forward. It ain't what people think it is, It's kind of it's something where what you bring makes all the difference, and things like time of day and all that, I would tune more to yourself than your guess about where they're coming from.
Yeah.
David, do you practice mindfulness during the day?
Not intentionally, let's just say. Not as much as I probably should. I think for me, it's more just about trying to balance the workflow throughout the day and being cognizant of burnout. So if you're pushing too hard, if you're burning through some of that energy that you need to be able to do things, being willing to take some time to take a break and do that. I don't have the skills that I'm sure you would recommend based on your programs, but I do try to at least be aware of it, and I do allow time in the day for that usually.
Now, the other question I have is a lot of people are under stress. Like Salesforce.com did a survey of their employees, and they found that 36% of employees suffer from emotional stress. They have mental health issues. Do you find that in your company? And how do you address that?
At SPARXiQ, I would say, we work in a very high intensity industry. The expectations, whether it's from our analytics business, our training business, all of the various technical problems that we solve are very high in terms of people's expectations of the outcomes, and they involve great mastery of detail. So I think there is a lot of that going on, but it's important to for people to manage that workload and to be able to build time into their schedules and be able to allocate time so that they don't get burned out. And we try to enforce that as a value in our company, really having a healthy work-life balance. But it's hard. We work in a really dynamic industry and where the expectations are really high.
What about you, Chris? How do you prevent burnout of your people?
I think part of it is when we're doing stuff with each other, I emphasize having fun. I mean, we're doing a thing today right before this meeting where we have an attribution capability that we're putting together, and it's almost finished, and we're applying it to our own company. And it's really important, right? Attribution of value, right? You make an investment in Connect and Sell or in anything else, and the question is, what do you get out of it? But I look back on that, and I bet if I go back and play the recording, there's probably 25% laughter. We're having fun, right? My saying for a long time has been, if you're not having fun, you're not taking this seriously enough, because you think that it's a sprint. The way we do the marathon of business is we have fun while we're doing it. And by the way, with regard to mindfulness, I must answer this every morning. This is my mindfulness routine. So I get up, I hit the coffee button, which I set the night before, and I grab an apple and a chef's knife, and I cut the apple in a stylized way, and I pay attention to the feel of the blade as it makes contact with the skin of the apple and it cuts into it. So the idea is to engage a lot of senses and a lot of emotions in a simple act, and to remind myself that I'm alive, right? The knife is sharp and the knife is dangerous. I have the tip of one finger missing in that lesson, right? It grew back more or less kind of, but it's always there. I always remind myself there's technique, and technique I think is important for us in a mindfulness.
They sell those pre-sliced.
Yeah. Yeah, I would never eat an apple that somebody else has gotten into, but
until after you lose your first finger.
Yeah. That was beef, and I tell you, I was trying to keep up with somebody. I learned never to hurry with the knife. But just the technique, right? This knuckle here is going to be what protects your hand, and just reminding myself to use it. The smell, when you cut into an apple, you smell the apple for the first time. And so I find that just starting each day with, and it's useful, by the way, half an apple goes in her oatmeal, half goes into mine, etc. But having something simple that you do every day. So I find that mindfulness comes more easily from action than it does from intention.
I have another question about creativity, because you're approaching yourself in a creative way and restore your ability to focus every single day. And a lot of people are struggling with what I would call self-care and self-creation, but also that spills over to the company, because we need more creativity in the company to figure out how can we sell more, how can we achieve more, how can we up productivity. So what can we do to improve that, the flow of the creative juices of our team?
Well, I mean, for me, it's really about defending your time, because defending your time and defending your mental bandwidth, because, I mean, obviously, once you've defended it, you have to answer the question, where does creativity come from? But for a lot of people, I think their real constraint is that they don't define what period of time is available to be creative, and they're not conscious of how to plan for that. So for me, it's just a matter of blocking off time on my calendar for peak energy levels, when I can focus on thinking or solving a problem or doing a deep dive. Because and I also, just as a side note, I don't do email at all during that period. So not even before that period, because I feel like my brain is contaminated when I start that way. But just having a period of time where you will not be engaged in busy work, and where you have, I like to even just have, I won't necessarily plan what it is that I'll be working on. So as I get up and I start thinking about, which of the things they're on my hit list, what I like to work on, just let it come to me, rather than try to pencil it in and say, I'm going to work on this thing. Because I think that activity of being so rigid about it actually is inhibiting to creativity.
Is there ever a moment, David, where you tell yourself, I can't do this, or where you have negative thoughts interfering while you're trying to create something?
There's days when you hope to accomplish that and it just isn't coming. And the good news is there's plenty of TDM waiting for you. Once you, if it's not working out, you give yourself an hour, that TDM will still be there and you can go get it. But the nice thing about practicing, and obviously every job has its constraints as to how well you can do that, but trying to do it, I think, is a good thing. And if there's an endless supply of tedium, so you don't have to feel bad if you don't come through with exactly the outcome you're looking for, because now you've just got some extra time to kill the tedious things that you were postponing. I think the line was feed the elephants and starve the ants. There's always going to be plenty of ants out there, and it's okay to run out of time on the ants. But if you find you have some extra time for the ants, that's okay.
What do you do creatively? Do you play music?
Sometimes I think music can be helpful, but having just kind of a blank canvas for me is helpful.
Cool. Chris, you read the question. Somebody's asking about what's a good balance of activities when you're prospecting?
Well, there's a good optimization when you're prospecting, which is, the amount of time that you're spending talking to relevant people should be just maximized. I mean, however you can figure out how to do that. It turns out that talking to people, you got to get them in a talking situation. So if you're prospecting using the voice, then a good balance is that while you're waiting for the next conversation, you should be doing something with the outcome of the previous conversation, because you now have a relationship. So your digital activities should be first focused on the person you just spoke with. That's most important. No matter how the conversation turns out, if you're spending your time talking to people and then amplifying the relationship or offering something in the future through a digital means, you're reaching out to them on LinkedIn, you're sending them a piece of information on through email, whatever it is. If you do those two things and then take your off time and use it to do research, and the research is to generate lists. So don't do research when you're in the middle of the prospecting day. Do the research at some other time, and its purpose is to say, this one goes in this list, and this one goes in this list, and this one goes in this list, and that's about it. So that's kind of it. I mean, there's not a lot of other things to do in prospecting other than talk to people, follow up with people with further conversations, and follow up with people with digital outreach. Doing it the other way around, I think, is kind of a waste of time. That is, if you talk to 30 people a day and you send some sort of digital follow-up to all 30 of those people, that's about as much digital work as you should do in a day reaching out to people anyway. You're starting to get a little spammy at 100. And so, 30 is about right. So talk to 30 people a day and follow up with them. It's kind of, I wish it were more complex, but it's not.
David, we talked in this conversation today a lot about engaging with customers, and we talked about emotions. And do you have any programs on the art of conversation?
We don't have any that specifically deal with that, but we do have some courses on personality and how to connect with people who are different from yourself. So I do believe the quality of conversation in part comes from your ability to understand who is the other person and what energizes them, what fatigues them. Those are, I think, key drivers in the success level of conversations. And the fact is, for most of us, the people we talk to are not just like us. And the interesting question becomes, are we able to spot those differences in personality quickly? Are we able to read the personality and the energy of the other person, be able to understand what the implications are, and to adapt quickly? So we do have a couple of courses. We call it our personality quotient program, that are Netflix-like streaming programs that help people to master that skill.
I know that you use OMG as well, where you allow people to assess their team and make the right decisions.
Definitely a big fan of Objective Management Group. Yeah, we use their tools. We've incorporated them into our talent selection and development programs. And I think, part of it is understanding who is the other person. And that may be understanding, their personality, their psychology. And then what Objective Management Group does, which we find valuable, it helps us to understand what are their belief systems, what are their attitudes about certain critical things, like what is their requirement for approval from other people? What is their, do they have a healthy skepticism when they get into a selling situation? Really helping, do they have a supportive buy process? When they buy things themselves, do they behave in ways that they're likely to accept put-offs from their buyers? So there's a lot of great tools out there that help us to really understand who are the sellers that we're trying to help, and what are their competency gaps, what are their belief system gaps. I mean, there's a lot of those types of analytics that can help to drive higher performance in sales organizations.
I think that with your online training, and there's so many resources out there. Why is it that not more sales leaders are embracing those tools? I see a lot of organizations not hitting the mark when it comes to engaging customers. So on one hand, you have the solution providers. On the other hand, you have a lot of problem owners that are not aware, they don't do anything.
Yeah, I think that, a big part of it's coming down now to distraction. So we live in a very distracted time where people are constantly being pulled in a million different directions. And during COVID, obviously, those tensions or distractions have become even greater, because a lot of people weren't used to this type of remote work, or they weren't used to how to connect with their colleagues, with customers. I mean, there's just a lot of disruption going on. So between disruption and distraction, I think it's taken a toll on people's ability to invest in self-improvement, which I think is, you just don't have the mental energy or the bandwidth to do that. And then frankly, training itself has been still locked in a really old era. Frankly, for most companies out there, their training is either lunch and learns, it's sitting in a conference room for 8 hours, getting bored to tears, which obviously COVID mercifully put a kibosh on that. I called it pre-forgetting, because there was no post-training follow through. So it's, basically people wasting money, sitting in conference rooms, pre-forgetting the things that somebody thinks they should forget eventually. But But the big opportunity, and now with everybody working remotely, can you imagine being asked to sit in on 8 hours of Zoom training? I mean, we're basically running into Zoom fatigue. And so I think training needs to change, and training needs to have more of the things that we appreciate in our personal lives. Like, none of us probably today, aside from those who are really seriously having a problem, would object to having an hour to watch something great on Netflix that they choose to watch. But unfortunately, training today is largely talking head videos. It's voice over PowerPoints. That's what virtual training has been. And what SPARXiQ has done is really to insist on a higher standard. And so we produce, using Hollywood methods of professional actors, scripting, narrative storytelling, casting, all of the things that people expect in their personal entertainment life, and try to bring that into the world of sales training. And I think it's going to make a difference. You know, it does require a different mindset. It does require also different post-training investments in terms of manager aids, job aids, things like that. But for training to have the impact that it needs to have, it has to change, and it can't be, you know, the old lunch and learn conference room, all of that stuff. People are they're burned out, and they're not going to invest the time in it. Between distraction and disruption, the mental budget for that has just disappeared.
So what you're saying is that in order to have a sales organization grow to the next level, they need to bake it into their strategy, and they need to have a plan, and they need to have some tools where they measure the results.
Yeah, I think, you know, the big question for folks who are considering training for their sales teams is, what % of our training is binge worthy versus cringe worthy? And so what does binge worthy mean? Binge worthy means training where people naturally consume it faster than you ask them to. And if you have to keep hectoring people, pushing them, prompting them to do the training, it's fair to ask whether your training is cringe worthy. And so we think that if you want to have a high impact training program, you have to consider, is energy flowing through that training program, or is it draining out of that program? And that's where we hope to make it.
Thank you, David. Chris, let's focus on another good question that came up. What would be a great rebuttal for we are not willing to switch this year, or we are staying put due to COVID? Try us back next year. Why are people staying put and not exploring options this year? How do we get prospects to engage this year and not be complacent?
Well, I think it's just a great question. It turns out it's universal. It doesn't have much to do with COVID. There's only 4 outcomes to a sales conversation. Yes, no, not me, not now. That's it. And they tend to run 5 to 10% yes at all points in the sales process. They tend to run, with most lists prospecting, they'll run about 20, 25% no. Real no's. That's somebody you really should never talk to again. So that's just your false positive rate going in because of the mismatch between available public data and what you would need to know about somebody in order to really qualify them. And then you're down to not me. Not me's pretty small. Not me runs maybe 2-3%. And you got to take advantage of those. And then not now is almost everything. So again, if I look at my team right now at this moment and ask, what do we have today? Today looks like a normal day, right? We have out of however many conversations there are. Let's see if I can scroll this up enough to actually see it. There we go. So my team's had 119 conversations today and set 22 meetings. So those are the yeses. They've got 4 referrals. Those are the not me's, right? So 4 out of 119. As I said, so it's a fairly small number. And they've had 54 that they're going to talk to in the future. We call them follow-ups. The key to handling everything in sales that has to do with not now is, and by the way, 11/12 of your market, roughly speaking, is naturally in a not now state, COVID or non-COVID. That is, the replacement cycle for almost everything that we buy in B2B is about 3 years. So maybe faster, it may be slower, but it's not a month. It's not a quarter. And the consideration time period for most sales, where the somebody goes from not considering to beginning to consider is normally something that's contained within a quarter. So there's 12 quarters within 3 years, and you have one of them in which a consideration is beginning. So that's 11/12 are in the future. That's just the way it is. That's life. And when you have a situation like that, the strategically right thing to do is to create a portfolio. And then to give yourself an advantage with all the not nows by talking to them regularly. We call it voice nurturing, call it what you will. If you have regular conversations with enough people, then as they ripen naturally out there and get closer to the date where they're going to be considering, you have an advantage. The COVID situation may have created a stall of a quarter or two. We really don't know. But it doesn't really matter what they say. When somebody says, talk to us next year, they can't possibly mean that literally. There is no next year in anybody's planning that's so concrete that, you know, talk to me next year is meaningful. What they're really saying is, I don't want to talk to you right now, not now. So, okay.
Chris, you said something I think is really important, because a lot of people who have to do this type of activity don't understand the underlying distribution properties of what's going on. I think that's why I think the data are so important, because like if you're doing calling and you don't understand that 11 out of 12 of them are not now, you can easily become discouraged, and that can take a toll on you because you don't understand that it has nothing to do, well, it's not that it has nothing to do with it, but it's just an underlying issue that you can't really resolve. I mean, you can obviously, in a non-buyer centric way, try to pressure people, but that's not a proven success factor. So, but I just think knowing that basic idea that for 11 out of 12 people where the answer isn't one of the other things, that not now, you know, is a legitimate answer, and being able to work with that, I think that's very liberating for people trying to do that type of work. And I think one of the questions that occurred to me is, how do you, as part of qualification, how do you get to knowing that quickly without being, you know, let's just say too direct? How do you get to that? Because if that's a legit, the math there is daunting, right? 11 out of 12, that's a pretty big number that aren't ready now. How do we get to that insight quickly so that we can move on to the next one?
Well, that's the key to the whole thing is, you know, if you, first of all, to get to it quickly, you need to talk to a lot of people. So that's number one. If you're not talking to enough people, you're not getting to it quickly in a market sense. Within the conversation, to get to it quickly, what you do is very simple. First conversations and follow-up conversations where you have not yet had a meeting, you very strictly hold yourself to one goal and one goal only, which is to find out if they're curious enough to take a meeting. Yeah. So that takes about 30 seconds. And your conversation with all the other things that go into it might take about a minute. There's actually a bimodal distribution of conversation, a trimodal distribution of conversation lengths. There's the I don't want to talk to you. They're pretty short. They tend to run about 15 to 20 seconds. There's the I don't want to take the meeting, and then there's your checking of that. So you check that just to make sure it's not a blow off, and you point out to them the potential value of the meeting for them, even if there's never any business to be done. And so that's probably going to take you about 50 to 60 seconds. That's sort of the middle of that distribution. And
so
then
to your mind, the willingness to take the meeting is at least what gets you some indication as to where it falls in that distribution.
Exactly. And then, you know, when you set the meeting, those are the ones where you have the extra logistics in the conversation. And the idea is to say that you use the meetings as the actual qualification arena, not the cold call or the follow-up call. And the reason for that is that you don't have enough trust built in a cold call or a follow-up call for somebody to confess their business problem or their challenges.
It's hard for you to do proper discovery without having rapport, I guess.
Yeah, it's actually, you create this really huge problem, which is a false negative problem. If you attempt to qualify on a cold call you'll jack your false negative rate up to the point where you're basically working for your competitor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a bad place to go. So
I think that one of the more interesting things that we've talked about in the past is the importance of knowing what the ask is during the call. And I think you've really lasered in on it, which is the ask is, can we have a meeting? And instead of trying to do any of those other things, you just hold it to something that's relatively low in terms of you don't have to elaborate, you don't have to go really deep, you don't have the basis yet to do that, and having the discipline in that first call to narrow what the objective is, it seems like that's really important to success.
Hugely. Your only product is the meeting, and all you're looking to do, and this is a huge problem actually, way back in list creation and list management. So if you don't hold narrowly to the goal of a conversation, of a cold conversation or a follow-up conversation being the meeting, you actually pollute your list, because you're reprocessing the list. Say I qualify you, in a cold call, and based on what you say, I decide that I don't want to have the meeting with you, and I'm the caller, right? But I put you on the list based on publicly available information. I didn't reliably learn anything new other than you don't want to take the meeting. I don't know why you said what you said, but you don't want to take the meeting. If I disqualify you at that point based on that information, I've actually gone back and damaged my list process, and I've taken a closed loop process in which I can take the yes, no, not me, not now spectrum coming out and apply it to tuning my list, and I've broken it because I've now processed the qualification in two different places. And the second place, which is in the conversation, is unreliable. In fact, it's unreliable and highly varied from rep to rep. So you should never qualify at all within a cold or follow-up conversation. If they want to take the meeting, give them the meeting. Let the qualification take place in there.
So let's go back to the rebuttal question. Is there any good way to develop a comeback and then, say something like, I understand how you feel. Can you help me understand the advantages for your situation to delay this another year?
Well, now we have context, right? So within a discovery conversation, you're trying to just discover the truth about their situation, not
right.
whether they're going to be a buyer. So you're just exploring their situation. And I think a question like that is a great question. The other great question is, so if the problem, the problem is the problem, what are you going to do? What are you doing about it today? What do you plan to do about it tomorrow? And what are the alternatives? I think the biggest problem in discovery is that reps want the deal. And a rep who wants the deal instead of wanting to learn the truth is effectively toast in sales. Your desire for the deal is what kills your ability to sell.
Yeah, I think we're in the midst of doing a program on business acumen for salespeople. And we're working with Jack Malcolm, who's written several good books on this bottom line selling. And I think one of the questions that Jack asks, which I thought was probably one of the most important questions I've ever heard, was simply, so what? So a lot of companies have problems with things. A lot of companies have certain unmet solutions, unmet needs. They need problems solved, et cetera, et cetera. What Jack brings to the table is he says, so what? A lot of people have those problems and they decide never to do anything about them. So why should I believe this is any different? And I think that so what question is really the ultimate qualifying question that gets you to, is this somebody who actually is committed to caring enough about this problem to actually make a decision? We know so many deals, so many opportunities land in no decision, basically DIY, something like that. And often DIY and do nothing are just two sides of the same coin. Ultimately, I think the answer is that they can't pass the so what test. There's not enough gap between their desired future state and their current state to create that momentum that's, that opportunity that's greater than the cost of change. And so that so what question to my mind is probably the most important one.
I think another way to approach it is that when you look at the state of mind of the average American, a third of the people in the United States are dissatisfied with their lives. And the people want a better situation for themselves. So there's something innate in the American society that we want to do better. But most people go with two speeds. They go full speed ahead, or they're stuck in park. And in the sales call, it's the same thing. The customer is ready to engage or is in permanent park. And I think to get out of that cycle, I think we need to have a little bit more creativity, and we need to learn more about that passive resistance that people protect themselves, especially in the COVID crisis. They want to make decisions that are very safe. They want to take very low risk. They want to spread the payments over the next 200 years. But innately, they want to do better. So the real question is to ask the customer, what is it that you want to feel better, to do better, and achieve your goals?
I think salespeople become their own worst enemies because they start listening for any sign of positivity, and they don't have a healthy skepticism. And healthy skepticism is an important part of not wasting time on the wrong opportunities. And so I think it's really having, being able to control your emotions, being able to really understand what the other person is and isn't saying. That, if you don't have the ability to be detached from the outcome, you want the outcome, but you want the right outcomes, and not having the right detachment from how the other person is behaving can lead you into a lot of false behaviors or going after bad opportunities, basically. And right. So I think it's just important as part of qualification to always be asking, so what? Even if all these things are true, is this somebody who's actually committed to solving the problem? And of course, as Chris says, you have to go through certain stages to get to the point where you can ask that question. But the faster you can get to understanding which of those opportunities are actually qualified, the more time you have to do all the great things that we're talking about. If you're constantly playing, the throw up, the show up and throw up, or playing the numbers game, you're just going to burn out. You just don't have the energy. And I think, like Chris said, you got to get lots of swings, but once you get the right meetings, you have to be able to focus on the right opportunities, or you're going to burn out.
I also think something that I recommend to reps, and I think it's really hard for folks to do, is if you need the other person to confess. Ultimately, it's a confession. Confessions are voluntary. They've got to want to confess. And the easiest way to do that is just to be vulnerable yourself. Just, stop interrogating and be a person who's got, problems of your own, so to speak. It's amazing how quickly people will start to talk about their own problems. You don't have to bitch about your problems. You just have to be a regular person who is in a regular situation, whatever it happens to be, and be vulnerable.
I think it's fair to, talk about a problem that you have, like just to tie these ideas together. It's okay to say, yeah, I have a problem with this type of thing too. But you know what? I had the same problem a year ago and I didn't do anything about it. You know why? Because it's just not an important problem that I want to solve. Yeah. And I have this problem, but my answer to the so what is, I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's not important. Do you ever feel that way? Like, just being able to have a conversation with somebody once you've identified a problem and say, I have lots of problems like that and I never do anything about them because I don't really care that much about them. Is that the way you feel about this problem? I mean, I think there's worse things to do than say I have lots of these types of challenges too. And the fact is I had the same challenge a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and just didn't make the test of something I wanted to invest time and energy in. I don't know. It just seems like avoiding wasted time. If you're going to do things well, at some point you have to find a way to weed out the things that aren't worth spending energy on.
Yeah, well, something I would remind everybody, I don't think most people even believe it, is that if you think about sales and what sales really is, sales is not primarily about persuasion. To get a prospect to do something is not what sales is about. Sales is primarily search. It's to find somebody that when they realize that you have a way to help them with something they do care about, that they keep advancing toward you, and their curiosity increases as they realize that you might be helpful to them. And that's just search. You know, my analogy is this: sales is like, it's a job like testing a bunch of bells, and your job is to figure out which ones are made of brass and which ones are made of clay. And the clay ones are no good, but they all look identical, and they're going by you on an assembly line. Mm-hmm. And all you can do, the only instrument that you're given, is a little hammer, and you use the hammer to tap the bell. And if the bell rings, then it's a brass bell. You take it off the line and you go find out if it rings in a way that you want it to. If it goes thud, which most of them do, well, you know, it only cost you one tap of the hammer. And that little hammer is a conversation. It's an actual conversation with somebody. It just takes a ton of conversations in order, you know, and I don't mean the first ones. I mean lots of discovery conversations, honest discovery conversations, in order to find the great opportunities. And the time that it takes is kind of the time that it takes. I mean, it just takes time. It's search. But if you're wasting time trying to persuade a clay bell to sound like a brass bell, and you keep hitting it over and over, it's still made of clay. It's not going to ring.
So are you saying, Chris, that you use the word curiosity? You're saying, in effect, that a good salesperson needs to be a good curiosity seeker, and needs to be an explorer, and not a persuader or a product pusher.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Curiosity is the key to business success, and even more the key to sales success. If you're genuinely curious about the other person's situation, you'll quickly discover whether you can help them or not with your offering.
Right. Dr. Diane Hamilton, by the way, wrote an interesting book, Cracking the Curiosity Code. And in the book, she talks about the inhibitors of curiosity, and there are four keys. One is fear, because fear of asking a dumb question, or fear of intruding on somebody's, social fears or something like that. Then the second is assumptions, that we assume that we're not going to get the right answer, or people are not going to talk about their reason why they delay another year. Then there's technology, where we overuse it or underuse it. And then the other one is the environment, that certain circumstances inhibit people's curiosity. David, I'm curious about, do you have any programs that awaken people's curiosity?
Well, we do have several. I think one of the ones that we're releasing shortly is called Modern Sales Foundations, and it's really aimed at helping sellers to engage in the right way with modern buyers to uncover a lot of the things that we're talking about here. And it's really focused on understanding authentically what are the challenges that the other party is facing, what are their opportunities, what impacts do they need to accomplish to be successful, what needs do they have, current needs, future needs, what are their objectives going forward, and most importantly, what are their priorities? Because a lot of times, just like Chris was talking about, the 11 out of 12, it's going to be not now if you have that challenge. That's really an issue of prioritization, and they've got something else that's more important right now. So if you want a framework for how to think about the things that matter to the other party, we call it COIN-OP. It's basically those 6 categories. They're very helpful just as a framework for how you engage with people to understand what is the real state of the opportunity and how do you qualify it. Without those types of answers to those types of questions, it's very difficult to qualify an opportunity. And that's really the bane of sales, is when you're exerting yourself on opportunities that aren't properly qualified.
Chris, we are approaching the end of our webinar. Ask Us Anything. What's your final parting shot, your closing thought of wisdom?
You know, we opened this up by saying, ask us anything. I think something we could all kind of take away is ask ourselves anything. Stay curious and ask yourself questions about what it is that you're experiencing during the day. Instead of just assigning an answer quickly based on your stock answers that you have, the assumptions or the quick answers, just step back every once in a while and ask yourself anything like, you know, why is this going on? I got one today that just showed up, and I'm pretty happy that I asked myself the question. I looked at something today and went, I don't understand that. I just realized that the meetings that are set by our inside salespeople for our AEs only convert to a third as much money as the ones set by the AEs for themselves, and yet they're calling on the same lead pools. They're talking to exactly the same people. I wonder why that is. I wonder why that is a really good question.
I was going to ask you a question, Chris. You've been doing this for a really long time. What pivot do you wish you had made earlier that would have saved you a lot of aggravation or made you more successful? What pivot in the way you understood the world would have changed your trajectory significantly?
35 years ago, I had earlier pivoted away from a family habit, actually, which I think I learned at the feet of my mother, or the defeat by my mother many times, which was the desire to win an argument, to be right. You know, I carried that way too far. And I know it's still inside me. I still like to win arguments. I still like to be right. And it's the most dangerous thing in the world in business, is the desire.
How about you, Gerhard? What pivot do you wish you had made earlier?
Oh, I have one regret. When I was invited in 1999 to ring the bell when Salesforce.com went public, I was thinking about investing maybe $25,000 just to support the company, because Salesforce was our biggest customer at the time. And I didn't.
That's a very practical one. I like it.
What about you, David?
I don't know. You know, when I first heard that question, I think it was at one of your conferences. I thought it was actually one of the more interesting questions. Like for us in our business, we didn't really get involved in trying to help sales forces until around 2015. And that was because our primary business was analytics, and we were basically feeding analytics to sales teams and counting on them to be able to translate those analytics into action. And so for the longest time, we considered the sales force to be, for lack of a better word, a necessary evil. And rather than investing the time and energy, as we have since then, to really understand where does sales performance come from, we didn't really dig into that issue. And a lot of time went by, a decade went by, where if we had dug into that question earlier, we could have helped our clients be a lot more successful. And so I think for me, that was probably one of those aha moments when I finally said, you know what, instead of viewing this as a constraint, we have to view it as an opportunity and really dig into it. So for me, that was a big pivot that I wish I'd made it a decade earlier.
Oh, well, we got the same one, by the way, which is it ConnectAndSell. I mean, if you're talking about a pivot that's within the company, we utterly failed to recognize something that was dead obvious, which is that the action's inside the conversation. Why don't we go in there and understand it and help? We thought always that the ecosystem, the training ecosystem, the consulting ecosystem, all these great trainers and consultants, we're just going to take care of this. I mean, come on, sales conversations are well understood, right? I mean, all we're doing is providing more of them. And we used to joke about it. You know, we'd say we amplify suck, but we didn't do anything about it. And then we decided to take a look inside the conversation and found out that there were different principles that could be applied, and there was something that could be done training-wise that was shocking. You could actually do real training with live conversations. You know,
I think one of the things that makes Connect and Sell really compelling, the technology is obviously fantastic, but to my mind, it's the deconstruction of success in calling that makes it so amazing, because it reminds me of what happens in sports where people break down, what will it take to get a quarterback, for example, who has a high completion rate. They may have all these athletic skills they need, but the bottom line is they need a certain amount of time without being pressured by the other team's defense in order to read the field and make the pass. And conversely, what do I have to do to have a great defense? Well, I have to make sure that the quarterback has pressure on them within this period of time. And so, I think in sales, a lot of the time we think, well, we have to score more than the other team. But what you guys have done is you've broken it down to, actually, a lot of it's going to come down to the seconds after the ball gets hiked. And if you're on defense, you got to get inside that line. If you're on offense, you got to be able to protect that line. And to me, it's having the awareness of what's going on in those little micro moments that actually pivots the whole equation in your favor. And I think that, to my mind, is one of the great contributions that your work at Connect and Sell has made.
Yeah, and I wish we'd made a pivot to that understanding earlier, but we didn't, but it is where we are now. And, we had the raw material, right? We had a lot of conversations. We listened to a lot of conversations. We just didn't believe it was our job.
I'd like to make one observation. I once got some advice from a sales trainer, and he says, improvement is not retroactive.
I think the big interesting question now is, what pivot should we be making during COVID that we'll be grateful that we made 10 years from now?
Right. And I have a quote I want to share from Ernest Hemingway. He said, "Now is no time to think of what you do not have. Think of what you can do with what there is."
I think that's great. Well, thank you, Gerhard. This has been quite a great experience today. Hopefully it was helpful to everybody. I was glad to join you.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, Chris. Join us again next week.
Take care.
Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.